When I saw my stepfather holding his tool and calling me into the bedroom, I couldn't resist and immediately gave in. Good afternoon, lovely viewers of the Infidelity Stories channel. Today, I finally have the courage to share the day I was with my stepfather. It was a moment of deep passion, and I want to be clear, we have no regrets. My name is Rachel, and I'm 26 years old. I've always been fascinated by my stepfather. He was the most important person in my life, someone I could always count on. Our connection was unique, deeper than any other relationship I had, growing up. He was my confidant, my best friend, and my advisor. I trusted him completely, especially when it came to talking about boys or relationships. Oddly enough, I never talked to my mom about these things. With him, it was easy. He listened, understood, and made me feel safe, everything felt normal until my mom and he separated. When they divorced, my world shifted. Watching him move out and live on his own was heartbreaking. Conversations and the closeness we shared. Even though he lived nearby, we couldn't see each other as often, and it created a physical distance between us. One night, after breaking up with my ex, I met him at a cafe. I poured out the story of how my ex had cheated on me. He tried to comfort me, but I was too angry to be soothed. As we left, driving home, we passed by a fancy motel, and he mentioned how luxurious it was. Without thinking, I joked about him taking his girlfriends there, but he just laughed it off. A few weeks later, during carnival season, he invited me to a party. We had fun, drank a little too much, and on the way home, I impulsively said I wanted to see the inside of that fancy motel. He hesitated for a second but agreed. Once inside, I was amazed by the luxury. It was far beyond anything I'd experienced before. My ex had taken me to cheap places, and this was the complete opposite. In that moment, something shifted. My desire for him, which I had buried for so long, surfaced. While taking a bath, it was as if everything we had held back for years suddenly came rushing to the surface. After that first night in the motel, things between us escalated quickly. The connection we had built over the years had now turned into something far more intense, more dangerous. I started finding myself thinking of excuses to see him more often, and he did the same. We'd meet in secret, sneaking around like teenagers, as if we were the only two people in the world who mattered. The thrill of it all, the forbidden nature of our relationship, made every moment we spent together even more intoxicating. We both knew it was wrong. We both knew that if anyone found out, it would destroy everything. But that was part of the excitement, wasn't it? We started meeting up in different motels, always trying to keep things under wraps. He'd pick me up after work or on weekends when my mom thought I was out with friends. Every time we met, the electricity between us felt like it was on another level, like we were crossing. Possible. I should have felt guilty, especially because I had started seeing someone new. But the truth was, nothing I felt with my new boyfriend compared to what I felt with my stepfather. One afternoon, as we lay together in a motel room, he looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, serious, almost regretful. Rachel, he began softly, brushing a strand of hair away from my face, we can't keep doing this forever. My heart skipped a beat. I could feel my stomach tighten. What do you mean? I asked, sitting up slightly. The idea of ending things hadn't even crossed my mind. How could it, when every touch, every glance from him made me feel so alive? He sighed, running his hand through his hair. Your mom, she doesn't deserve this. And neither do you. This, whatever we have, it's dangerous. And I don't want to hurt you more than we already have. It wasn't like I hadn't thought about the risks, about what we were doing and how it could destroy everything if it ever came to light. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way I hadn't been prepared for. I looked away, biting my lip, trying to hold back the emotions bubbling up inside me. So, what? You want to end things? My voice came out shaky, almost fragile. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. I don't want to, he whispered, but maybe we should. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thick with tension. I couldn't imagine my life without him, not now. He had become my entire world, in a way no one else had. The idea of walking away, of going back to my normal life, felt impossible. But before I could respond, my phone buzzed. I glanced down to see a message from my new boyfriend, Chris. Miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight. The irony wasn't lost on me, I was lying. Boyfriend was texting me about how much he missed me, I turned off the phone, tossing it to the side, and looked back at my stepfather. I don't know how to stop, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't think I want to, he closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. When he opened them again, there was a softness there, an understanding. Neither do I, he finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. But we're playing with fire, Rachel. Sooner or later, we're going to get burned, I didn't say anything after that. Instead, I leaned forward, pressing my lips to his in a desperate attempt to stop the conversation from going any further. I didn't want to think about the consequences, didn't want to face the reality of what we were doing. All I wanted was to feel that rush, that connection with him that made everything else fade away, and for the moment, that was enough. Each other, pretending like the rest of the world didn't exist, but deep down, I knew he was right. This couldn't go on forever. One day, everything would come crashing down, and we would have to face the consequences of what we had done. The only question was, when, over the next few weeks, things between us became even more complicated. We both tried to act normal, but there was an unspoken tension. We met less frequently, and when we did, there was an air of finality in every touch, every kiss. It was like we were both aware that this couldn't last, but neither of us could bring ourselves to stop, my relationship with Chris, my new boyfriend, was growing more serious. He was sweet, attentive, and seemed genuinely invested in me. Yet, every time I was with him, I couldn't help but compare everything to the connection I had with my stepfather. Chris was nice, but the excitement, the danger I felt with my stepfather, was like nothing I had ever experienced. It was addictive. I knew it. One evening, Chris surprised me with dinner at a restaurant I'd always wanted to go to. It was a perfect evening, candles, wine, and soft music playing in the background. He reached for my hand across the table, and for a moment, I let myself relax, pretending that this was enough, that I could be content with a normal relationship, but then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I discreetly checked the screen under the table, it was him. My stepfather, meet me tonight? The message was short, but it sent a wave of excitement coursing through me. I felt my heart race as I quickly slid the phone back into my bag, trying to focus on Chris, who was talking about his plans for the weekend, but all I could think about was my stepfather, waiting for me. I excused myself to the restroom, where I stared at my reflection in the mirror, torn between two worlds. I knew I shouldn't go. I knew that if I kept this up, I would eventually ruin everything, my relationship with Chris, my life with my mom, everything. I texted him back, I'll be there, when I returned to the table, Chris smiled at me, completely unaware of the internal battle I was fighting. We finished dinner, and he dropped me off at home, kissing me sweetly on the cheek before driving off into the night. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I felt a rush of adrenaline. I quickly grabbed my keys and headed out, knowing exactly where I was going, we met at a small motel on the outskirts of town, one we hadn't used before. I walked in, heart pounding, and found him already waiting in the room. His eyes met mine, and I could see the same mix of excitement and guilt reflected in them, Rachel, he said softly, pulling me into his arms as soon as the door closed behind me. We need to talk, my stomach flipped. I didn't want to talk. I wanted to forget everything for a while, to lose myself in him like we always did. But his tone was different tonight, serious, like something had shifted. I pulled back slightly, looking up at him. What is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I've been thinking a lot about what we're doing. About how this is going to end, a knot formed in my throat. End. The word felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't want it to end. I didn't know how to go back to life without him, he nodded, his expression pained. We can't keep this up, Rachel. Your mom, she's starting to notice things. She asked me if I've seen you lately, if I know why you've been acting so distant. He paused, his eyes searching mine. I don't want to lie to her anymore, guilt hit me hard. I hadn't realized my mom was picking up on things. I had been so consumed by the thrill of our affair that I hadn't noticed how much I was pulling away from her. I hadn't even thought about how this might be affecting her. Corners of my eyes. I don't know how to stop, I admitted, my voice cracking. I don't want to lose you, he cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm. I don't want to lose you either, he said softly, but this isn't sustainable. Sooner or later, it's all going to fall apart, I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. He was right, of course. But that didn't make it any easier, for a moment, we stood there in silence, the tension between us thick. Then, almost instinctively, we moved toward each other, drawn together by the same force that had been pulling us into this dangerous affair from the start. His lips met mine, and for a few blissful minutes, I forgot everything, the guilt, the fear, the looming consequences. All that mattered was him, but when we finally pulled apart, the reality of the situation came crashing back down. I can't do this anymore, he whispered. Always will. But we have to stop, my heart shattered at his words. I wanted to argue, to tell him we could make it work somehow, but deep down, I knew he was right. We couldn't keep living this double life forever. It wasn't fair to anyone, least of all my mom, with a heavy heart. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. Okay, I whispered, my voice barely audible, we spent the rest of the night lying together in silence, neither of us saying a word. It was as if we both knew this was the end, our final goodbye. When morning came, we parted ways, knowing that we could never go back to what we had, but even as I walked away from that motel room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly the end. That, no matter how hard we tried, we would find our way back to each other. Because what we had was more than just an affair. It was something deeper, something that neither of us could fully explain. Could walk away. A part of me knew I never really would, the days that followed were like walking through a fog. I went through the motions of my daily life, but my mind kept drifting back to that final night with him. Every time I passed by the places where we had secretly met, or when I heard a song that reminded me of him, the ache in my chest would return. It was like a constant reminder of what I had lost, Chris, oblivious to everything, continued to be the perfect boyfriend. He would text me sweet messages, take me out to dinner, and talk about the future like we had one. I wanted to be present with him, to give him the love and attention he deserved, but my heart wasn't in it. How could it be when I had already given it to someone else? I spent a lot of time avoiding my mom. Every conversation felt like a trap, like she could somehow sense what had been happening behind her back. There were moments when she'd casually mention my stepfather, ask if I had seen him, if I knew how he was doing. Each. Guilt so strong it almost knocked the breath out of me. I would offer vague answers, making excuses to leave the room whenever the topic came up, but the truth was, I missed him more than I could express. I missed our secret meetings, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. I missed the thrill of sneaking around, the rush of adrenaline that came with every stolen moment. And even though I knew it was wrong, even though I knew it couldn't continue, a part of me was still holding on, hoping that somehow, someway, we'd find our way back to each other, then, one Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a familiar number. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the screen. It was him. My stepfather. I hadn't heard from him since that night in the motel, and I had forced myself not to reach out, trying to respect his decision to end things. But now, seeing his name light up my screen, all the emotions I had been trying to suppress came flooding back, without thinking, I answered. Hello. My voice was shaky, betraying the nerves I was trying to hide, there was a long pause on the other end before he finally spoke. Rachel. I need to see you, just hearing his voice again made my chest tighten. I had spent weeks convincing myself that it was over, that we were done, but now, with just a few words, I felt like I was being pulled back into the whirlpool of emotions all over again, I don't know if that's a good idea, I said quietly, though even as I said it, I knew I didn't mean it, please, he insisted, his voice low and urgent. Just one last time. We need to talk, there was something in his tone, something that made me pause. I knew I should say no, that seeing him again would only make things harder, but I couldn't help myself. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Somewhere neutral, somewhere public. It felt safer that way, though the tension between us was still palpable. When I arrived, I saw him sitting on a bench, staring off into the distance. He looked different somehow, more serious, as if the weight of everything had finally caught up with him, he stood when he saw me approaching, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, and I wasn't sure how to start. You look good, he finally said, offering a small, almost hesitant smile, Thanks, I replied, unsure of what else to say. The awkwardness between us was new, uncomfortable, and I hated it. This wasn't how we were supposed to be, we sat down on the bench, the silence stretching on for what felt like forever. Finally, he broke it, I've been thinking a lot about us, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Ended it, I stared at him, waiting for him to continue, I don't regret anything that happened between us, he said, looking me straight in the eyes. But I can't keep living with the guilt. Your mom, she deserves better than this. And so do you, his words stung, even though I knew they were true. The guilt had been eating away at me too, though I had tried to push it down, to bury it under the weight of my emotions. But sitting there, listening to him, I couldn't deny it any longer, I don't know how to stop feeling this way, I admitted, my voice breaking. I don't know how to let you go, he reached out, taking my hand in his, and for a moment, it was like everything was back to how it used to be. His touch was warm, comforting, and familiar. But this time, there was a sadness to it, a finality that I couldn't ignore. Said softly, we have to let each other go, I blinked back the tears that were threatening to fall, nodding even though every part of me wanted to scream, to beg him to change his mind. But I knew he was right. We couldn't keep doing this. We were playing with fire, and eventually, we were going to get burned, I just wish things were different, I whispered, me too, he replied, his voice thick with emotion, for a long time, we sat there in silence, neither of us willing to be the first to walk away. It felt like the end of an era, like I was saying goodbye to not just him, but to a part of myself. Finally, he stood up, squeezing my hand one last time before letting go. Take care of yourself, Rachel, I watched him walk away, my heart aching with every step he took. I wanted to call out to him, to tell him to come. The end, and for the first time, I truly understood what it meant to let go of something you love, as the sun began to set, I sat there on that bench, feeling the weight of everything settle on my shoulders. I knew it would take time to heal, to move on from the secret life we had shared. But I also knew that eventually, I would. Because, as much as I had loved him, as much as I had wanted to hold on, some things were never meant to last, in the weeks that followed, I felt like I was living in a kind of limbo. Part of me was trying to move on, to leave behind the whirlwind of emotions and the secret life I'd lived with my stepfather. But another part of me was still clinging to the memories, replaying every moment in my head as if I could somehow make sense of it all. I threw myself into my relationship with Chris, trying harder to make it work. He was patient, kind, and everything I should have wanted in a partner. Yet, I couldn't. Much I tried. There was always something missing, an intensity, a spark that I had only ever felt with my stepfather. The guilt gnawed at me constantly, especially when Chris would look at me with such genuine affection, completely unaware of the storm I was hiding inside. One evening, as we lay in bed together, Chris turned to me and said, Rachel, I've been thinking. I really love you. I think we should move in together, his words hung in the air, heavy with expectation. I froze, unsure of how to respond. Moving in together? It felt like a huge step, one that should have excited me, one that should have made me feel happy. But instead, it filled me with dread. How could I commit to him when my heart was still so tangled up in someone else? I forced a smile, trying to mask the panic rising inside me. That's a big step, I said, hoping my hesitation wasn't too obvious, Chris frowned slightly, concern flickering. Want? I could feel the weight of his question pressing down on me. It wasn't that I didn't care about him, he was a great guy. But moving in together felt like a commitment I wasn't ready for, especially with everything still so unresolved in my head. I hadn't even begun to process my feelings for my stepfather, let alone start a new chapter with Chris, I need some time, I finally said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's not that I don't care about you, Chris. I do. But I think I need to figure some things out first. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Rachel, Are you sure there's nothing else going on? You've seemed distant lately, my heart skipped a beat, and for a split second, I thought he knew about everything. But then I realized he was just worried, confused by my behavior. I wanted to tell him the truth, to confess everything and unburden myself, but everything, and I wasn't ready for that, no, nothing's going on, I lied, forcing myself to meet his gaze. I've had a lot on my mind, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right. I'll give you space. But Rachel, I need to know where we stand. I'm serious about us, I nodded, even though I wasn't sure where I stood myself. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. I was caught between two worlds, one where I tried to live a normal life with Chris, and another where I couldn't stop thinking about the man I had left behind, as the weeks turned into months, I tried my best to let go of the past. I focused on my relationship with Chris, making an effort to be present, to give him the attention he deserved. Slowly, things started to improve. We spent more time together, and I found myself growing more comfortable with the idea of a future with him. But deep down, there was still that lingering ache, that part of me that couldn't fully let go of One afternoon, while I was visiting my mom, we were sitting in the living room, sipping tea and catching up. The conversation was light, mostly about work and friends, but then she brought up something that made my heart stop, I ran into Jack the other day, she said casually, referring to my stepfather by name. He seems to be doing well, I froze, trying to keep my expression neutral. Oh, how's he doing, she shrugged. He seemed fine. We didn't talk for long, but he mentioned his thinking about moving. Something about a job opportunity in another state, my stomach dropped. Moving? I hadn't seen him in months, not since that night in the park when we had said our goodbyes. The idea of him leaving, of him disappearing from my life completely, hit me harder than I expected, do you know where he's moving to? I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart was racing. I think he mentioned California, she replied, sipping her tea. He didn't give many details, California. That was across the country. If he moved, I knew it would be the end, really the end. There would be no more chance encounters, no more late-night texts or secret meetings. The thought of him being so far away made my chest tighten with a mix of panic and sadness, I forced a smile, nodding as if the news didn't affect me. That's nice. I hope it works out for him, but inside, I was reeling. I knew I should be happy, this was what we had agreed on, after all. We had both decided to move on, to let go of the past. But the idea of him being gone for good, of never seeing him again, made me feel like I was losing a piece of myself, that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of him. I wondered if he had already made his decision, if he was packing up his life and preparing to leave without a second thought. Part of me. It was true, but I knew I couldn't. If I opened that door again, I would only be dragging myself back into the same cycle of confusion and heartache, but the next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. I couldn't keep living like this, caught between the past and the future. If he was moving, then this was my chance to finally let go, to move on for real. I had to make a decision, either reach out to him one last time, or let him go forever, after pacing around my apartment for what felt like hours, I finally grabbed my phone and opened our old conversation. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the keyboard. What could I even say? What would be the point? But before I could talk myself out of it, I typed a simple message, are you really moving? I hit send before I could overthink it. A few minutes passed, then an hour, and there was no reply. I began to wonder if he had blocked my number or if he had already left without a word. But just when I was about to give up, my phone buzzed, yes. I leave next week, my heart sank as I read his reply. It was real. He was leaving. I stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond, unsure if I should respond at all. I had my answer, but now that I had it, I wasn't sure what to do, finally, after what felt like an eternity, I typed a reply, I'll miss you, I hit send, knowing that those 3 words didn't even begin to capture the depth of what I was feeling. But they were all I could bring myself to say. I didn't want to ask for more. I didn't want to beg him to stay. I just wanted him to know that, no matter what, I would always miss him, his reply came a few minutes later, short and simple, I'll miss you too. And that was it. The final message. The final goodbye, the days after his final message were some of the hardest. I had known it was over, but now the reality hit me, he was really gone. The ache of losing him, and the life we had secretly built, was overwhelming. Yet, I tried to focus on Chris and rebuild my life. He was supportive, always there for me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, One evening, as we sat together, Chris asked if I was okay. I lied, telling him I was just stressed with work. He didn't push, but his concern only deepened the guilt I felt. I knew I had to make things right with him, and slowly, I began to refocus on our relationship. We started spending more time together, and despite the lingering memories of my stepfather, I worked to be more present in our life, weeks passed, and the pain began to fade. The sharpness of what I had lost softened, and while I still thought of my stepfather from time to time, it didn't consume me. Eventually, I realized that for me to truly let go, it wasn't easy, but I knew it was necessary, Chris and I moved in together, just like he had suggested. It wasn't the intense whirlwind of emotions I'd experienced before, but it was stable. It was real. I no longer lived a double life, and though the memories of my stepfather still lingered, they no longer held me captive, sometimes, late at night, I would think of him, the thrill, the excitement, but then I'd look over at Chris, sleeping peacefully beside me. I had learned the difference between passion and stability, and I finally knew what I needed, letting go wasn't easy, but it was the bravest thing I could do. And now, as I lay wrapped in the warmth of Chris's arms, I felt a sense of peace, knowing I had finally found where I belonged. Before you leave, remember to subscribe to the channel by activating the Tinkerbell to receive notification every time